There's a mine in the Midwest that people forget exists until they need something from it. A salt mine, carved in a perfect grid, room and pillar, mile after mile of white rock left standing so the rest can be eaten away. But halfway down, at the minus 650-foot level, a company carved out something stranger. Perpetua Preservation, a film archive deep underground where cans of acetate and reels of tape are stacked on steel racks like they're waiting for the world to rewind itself. The conditions are perfect. 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 30% relative humidity, air's so dry your hands crack after an hour. Salt eats water and leaves everything else alone. Or so they claim. I was hired to cover a single overnight, swap a faulty sensor, check the dehumidifier bank, and run an audit on D-Wing, aisle 19, where inventory had gone odd. 8 hours underground, alone. The elevator cage rattled me down through rock that got older every floor. The airlock doors sighed when I badged in, like the building was tasting me. Inside, forklifts sleeping on chargers, and office fern yellowed to the color of grief, and a wall of monitors glowing green numbers. Somewhere far down the corridor, a sign. The long shelf, D-Wing.
The control desk logbook was waiting, its last entry from a day shift tech who wrote VOC trending stable, Unit 4 compressor noisy, in neat block letters. I signed my name under his, Rowan M, 2103, on site. The corridor stretched in front of me, racks rising on either side into a ceiling that curved like the belly of a whale. Reflective chevrons on the salt pillars caught my headlamp and gleamed like eyes. The air tasted of plastic and vinegar, faint but insistent, the smell of film remembering it isn't immortal. In D19, the overhead lights woke slowly, one strip at a time, until the aisle glowed a pale gray. My handheld scanner chirped at the first rack marker. Paramount negatives, 1971. Inventory matched. Pallets clean. Cans stacked flush. Halfway down, the air shifted. Not warmer, not colder. Hungrier. My monitor blinked. VOC 0.24 ppm. Still safe, but the smell sharpened, biting the back of my nose. I tagged a pallet, wrote a note, and kept walking. That's when I heard it. A whisper, not language, but the shh of film rubbing against itself inside a can. 2 beats. Pause. 2 beats. Polite. Intentional. The scanner chimed again, throwing up a message I hadn't called. ENV D-Wing microclimate shift. Consult bank status. The dehumidifier bank was only a crosscut away. 6 units lined up like sleeping trucks. Tonight, Unit 4 glowed amber. Condensate pan full. Impossible. Salt mines don't allow condensation, but the clear drain tube held cloudy liquid like diluted milk. I freed the float switch. The compressor spun down, restarted. The smell sharpened just enough to water my eyes. The monitor blinked again. VOC 0.28 ppm. Still green, still wrong. Back in D19, the little anemometer at the aisle head was spinning backwards, air flowing opposite design. The archive was breathing in when it should have been breathing out. At the end of the aisle, a laminated safety poster fogged over in a perfect oval, as if someone had leaned close to breathe. In 30% humidity, that doesn't happen. I touched the plastic. The chill clung to my glove longer than it should. The oval faded. My radio clicked open without a voice. I wrote in the log anyway. 2141, Unit 4 pan cleared. VOC 0.28 ppm. Air reversal in D19. Poster fogged oval. And beneath that, because superstition is better than silence, the room is awake.
The clock on my scanner ticked over to 2200. I made a habit of saying the hour out loud, 10 p.m., because it keeps the mind from drifting when the walls feel closer than they are. My voice fell flat against the racks, swallowed like the salt didn't care to echo. I moved deeper into D19, running the audit. Box labels blinked green on the scanner until they didn't. At D1907, inventory claimed a pallet of regional TV prints 1982, but the shelf held cans stamped "Private Client, Do Not Open." 2 bays later, the opposite, misslotted, easy mistake. But the scanner chirped twice more, stubborn, as if it didn't believe its own eyes. The airflow propeller above me spun backwards with a new confidence, as if the aisle had decided which way to breathe. At floor level, my shin caught a draft moving inward, a steady pull. I crouched, and the smell grew sharper down low. Vinegar, brittle tape, a whisper of metal left in rain. I scanned D1909. The hand held through a warning. Located off slot. Verify oldest. That word again, oldest, not in the system's vocabulary. Not earliest accession, not primary negative. Someone or something was writing its own notes. From overhead came a faint tick-tick, like a can shifting against steel. I swung my headlamp up. On the 3rd rack level, a slip sheet, a plastic pad, lifted at one corner, then dropped, lifted again, like something below was exhaling against it. There was no duct there. At the far end, a yellow safety phone hung in its box. I lifted the receiver. No dial tone, just a low carrier hum that pulsed 3 times, then went steady again. I held my breath, waiting for words that didn't come. Set the phone back gentle. The laminated safety poster I'd seen earlier had gone clear, the fog oval gone. In its place, faint salt crystals traced a new shape across the lamination. 3 vertical lines, like tally marks. I touched them. They crumbled under my glove and fell like sugar. I wrote in my notebook, 2219, off-slot pallets,
Scanner repeats oldest. Slip sheet movement. Safety phone hum pulses X3. Poster now marked. The handheld chimed again with its smug tone. VOC 0.30 ppm. The number didn't scare me, but the precision did. Numbers rarely look so rehearsed. I turned off my lamp to test the dark. The overheads glowed faint, tired, leaving only outlines. Between the racks, a shadow didn't behave. It leaned across the aisle against the logic of my beam, as if the shelving wanted to step forward. When I clicked my lamp back on, the shadow snapped away, leaving every can flush and proper, like nothing had ever been wrong. At 22:58, I logged the hour change. Pallet drift confirmed. VOC stable at 0.30. Airflow reversed. Shadow anomaly. And because the aisle deserved honesty, I whispered, "I know you're listening." Something in the silence shifted, almost like a breath pulled deeper.
The handheld scanner was getting smug, each chirp sharper, more insistent. At 23:07, it flagged a pallet, D1912C, Paramount Camera Originals, 1971. The database swore the reel should be sealed in a shrink-wrapped can at waist height. Instead, I found the shrink torn, the can sitting slightly forward, as though it had been pulled and pushed back again. The lid bore no rust, no fingerprints in the dust, but the tape strip across it had peeled at one corner, curling up like a tongue. I crouched, glove brushing the metal. Cold, too cold, like the can had been chilled separately from its neighbors. When I lifted the edge, a sound breathed out, not a hiss of escaping air, but the soft rasp of plastic brushing plastic, like film shifting on its reel. It carried a rhythm again. 2 beats, pause, 2 beats, the same knock I'd heard before. The scanner chimed, verify oldest. The word blinked 3 times, then froze. I wrote it down. My handwriting looked shaky under the LED. 2312. Reel at D1912C, disturbed, cold to touch. Scanner repeats, oldest. Halfway down the aisle, the anemometer spun harder in reverse, the blades rattling like teeth. At ankle height, the draft tugged stronger, enough to move a loose scrap of shrink wrap across the floor. It skittered past my boot and folded itself against a salt pillar. Above, on the 3rd rack, a can rattled softly. I lifted my beam. One reel nudged forward by half an inch. As I watched, it eased back flush, slow and deliberate, like a hand withdrawing. The wall monitor pinged yellow, VOC 0.33 ppm, still safe, still wrong. By 23:38, the air tasted of old vinegar and static. I checked the safety phone again. The carrier hum pulsed 4 times now, not 3, 4. Back at the aisle's head, the poster that had fogged earlier now bore a faint outline of a reel traced by salt bloom. A circle, a hub, even sprocket teeth. I stepped back. The drawing was crude but undeniable. The clock struck midnight. I logged. 00, reel displaced. Phone hum X4. Poster marked with reel shape. VOC 0.33. Airflow reversed harder. Then I underlined one word, escalating. The aisle seemed to approve, its silence tightening like it wanted me to keep going. At midnight sharp, the mine reminded me it was alive. A low rumble passed through the floor, far away, like a train in a tunnel that hadn't seen rails in decades. Dust shook from the salt ceiling, sparkling in my beam like frozen rain. The racks trembled just enough to clink a few cans together, a sound like coins in someone else's pocket. I steadied myself against a pillar. My glove came away coated with salt dust fine as flour. It burned my nostrils when I sniffed, sharp with vinegar that wasn't supposed to be there. The VOC monitor blinked higher, 0.36 ppm. The number didn't scare me yet, but the way it climbed in neat little steps like a countdown did. I pushed deeper into D19, scanning racks. At D19-15, the inventory claimed a missing reel, private client, do not open. Yet here it sat, labeled and clean. The missing tag was still logged in the system, red and glaring. The scanner chimed twice, hesitated, and threw up the same word. Oldest. Always oldest. I wrote in my notebook, 0022, reel returned, system still flags as missing, word oldest persists. Half an hour passed in steady audit, but nothing stayed steady. The airflow changed again. The draft at my ankles grew sharp, almost icy, pulling harder into the aisle. It carried with it a sound, faint but clear, the whisper, shh, of reels shifting in cans. Louder now, not one can, but several. The sound filled the aisle like a chorus rehearsing in secret. I froze under the hum of fluorescence. My headlamp caught the anemometer spinning backward, fast, faster, until the blades blurred and squealed. Then suddenly, it stopped dead. Silence pressed in. From behind me, a pallet creaked, a soft metallic scrape, like a can sliding half an inch across steel. I turned quick, beam wide, heart faster. Every reel sat neat, proper, unmoving. Except the dust. A trail of disturbed dust curved from the edge of one pallet, across the shelf, then ended abruptly, like a finger dragged in powder. At 0057, my radio cracked. Just static at first, then faint. Rowan, my name carried soft, stretched thin. I snapped it to my ear, answering. Nothing. Just the carrier hiss of distance. The hour ticked over. I logged 1 hour, cold draft intensifies, reels whisper in chorus, dust disturbed on pallet, radio whispered my name, VOC, 0.36. I underlined twice, contact. And for the first time that night, I admitted it wasn't the machines that wanted me. It was the archive itself.
The handheld scanner was sulking, its little screen flickering between green check marks and red flags like it couldn't make up its mind. At 0108, I pinged a rack, D1917B, and it chirped, found. When I looked up, the pallet was bare steel. No reels, no shrink wrap, nothing but dust. I rescanned, this time missing. The system was arguing with itself. I moved 3 bays down. Same trick. Pallet says private client. Shelf shows regional TV, 1983. The mismatch made my eyes twitch, but it wasn't just clerical sloppiness anymore. The scanner kept inserting that word, oldest. Each time bigger font, bolder letters, as if it was losing patience. The VOC monitor jumped to 0.38 ppm. The number glowed yellow now, a polite warning. The air tasted sharper, like biting a penny. I rubbed my tongue against my teeth and felt grit, though there was none. The draft at floor level kept pulling in, colder by the minute. Loose shrink-wrap strips fluttered along the floor tiles like pale snakes. One wrapped itself around my boot before sliding off, carried deeper into the aisle. At 01:24, the overhead lights dimmed, not out, but down a notch, as if the aisle had taken a breath. The racks loomed darker, and in the half-light, some cans looked forward-pushed, waiting to be noticed. I scanned again. The handheld displayed something new. Follow oldest shelf. Not a reel, not a box, a shelf. I wrote in my notebook, letters pressing hard. 01:27, scanner misreporting inventory. Empty shelves read, found. Message changed. Follow oldest shelf. Behind me, metal pinged. A can expanding or contracting, except the sound repeated once, twice, 3 times, evenly spaced like footsteps. I turned my lamp. The aisle stood straight and empty, but the reflective chevrons painted on the salt pillar seemed shifted, crooked, just slightly. At 01:41, the yellow phone at the aisle head rang. Not a hum, a ring, shrill, mechanical, cutting the silence. I lifted the receiver. No voice, just the same hum, pulsing 5 times this round, then steady. I set it back with shaking hands. By 01:59, I'd written my log for the hour. Inventory drifting. Scanner insists follow oldest shelf. Phone rang. Hum X5. Lights dimmed. VOC 0.38. Draft colder. I hesitated and added, the archive is building instructions.
The silence after the phone stopped was worse than the ring itself. It sat heavy, waiting, like the aisle wanted me to prove I was paying attention. At 02:05, I scanned another rack, D1918A. The handheld lit up, found Paramount Print 1971. But the shelf was stacked with anonymous gray cans, no studio markings, no barcodes. They looked older, dented, metal scuffed to bare shine at the rims. None of them matched the database. The scanner chirped again, urgent, as if correcting me. Follow oldest shelf. The letters pulsed red this time, filling the screen. The VOC monitor climbed, 0.40 ppm. The number wasn't dangerous, but it marched upward like a metronome. The air smelled harsher now, vinegar braided with something like wet stone, a mineral tang that didn't belong. I wrote it down, pen scratching louder than felt possible. 02:11, mismatched pallets. Scanner insists on oldest shelf. VOC at 0.40. Air sharp, metallic. The floor draft tugged harder, steady as tide. My boots crunched against salt dust that hadn't been there an hour ago. A thin film covered the tiles, shimmering under my lamp. At 02:27, another noise joined the night. A tap-tap, faint, hollow, like a cane on concrete. It came from the crosscut, then paused, then came again, even, measured. I stepped into the aisle's mouth and aimed my headlamp. The crosscut stretched empty, pillars neat, nothing moving. The sound had stopped. Back in D19, the safety poster I'd touched earlier had changed again. The salt bloom reel sketch was gone, replaced with 3 vertical streaks, uneven, as if drawn by wet fingers. They glistened under my beam, then dried into pale white scars. At 0:46, the yellow phone rang again. I lifted it. This time the hum pulsed 5 times, slow and deliberate. After the 5th, silence, pure and heavy.
I whispered into the headset, "What do you want?" The hum came back once, long and low, vibrating through the cord into my wrist. I hung up. At 0:59, I logged. Phone hum sequence now 5. Poster marked again. Floor coated with salt dust. Scanner repeats message. Red. Follow oldest shelf. VOC 0.40. Then, almost against myself, I added, 0:59. The aisle is counting.
By 3:04, the scanner refused to behave. Every rack I pinged returned the same command in angry red. Follow oldest shelf. No inventory data, no barcodes, just that single demand. The device vibrated in my palm like a heart out of step. I moved deeper, boots crunching on a thicker layer of salt dust. The aisle's air had grown so dry it made my tongue feel like paper. Yet at floor level, the draft kept pulling inward, colder and wetter, like two climates colliding. At D1920, something shifted. The shelf itself sagged, faint but visible, a bow in the steel beams. Pallets leaned against each other as if the weight above had grown overnight. My lamp swept across and caught cans shoved too far forward, rims hanging over the edge like they wanted to fall. One did. The clang was sharp enough to rattle my teeth. A single gray can bounced once, rolled in a neat circle, and came to rest against my boot. The label was gone, paper peeled clean, leaving only adhesive scars. The scanner chimed instantly, oldest found. I crouched. The can was ice cold, sweating a thin film of condensation. Impossible, forbidden in this climate. My gloves squeaked against the metal when I touched it. Inside, film shifted with a sigh, a noise too alive for dead acetate. At 3:27, the overhead lights flickered twice, not random, a rhythm, short, long, the Morse equivalent of an O. I wrote in my notebook with a hand I didn't trust. 3:27, shelf sagging, can fell to floor, scanner reads oldest found, lights flickered in pattern, cold condensation present. The VOC monitor beeped, 0.42 ppm. The number glowed orange now. At 3:41, the yellow phone rang again. I didn't want to answer, but habit pushed me. The hum pulsed 6 times. After the 6th, faint static shaped itself into half a word, old shh, before tutting off. By 3:58, the salt dust on the floor was thicker still. My boots left trails like footprints in fresh snow. But when I looked back, some of them had smoothed over, as though the floor had decided I'd never passed. The hour closed. I logged 3:59, can displaced. Scanner insists, oldest found. Lights flicker pattern. Phone hums 6 pulses. VOC 4.2 ppm. Footprints erased behind me. And then, almost without thinking, I wrote 3:59. The shelf is waiting.
The can at my boot stayed where it landed, but the longer I looked at it, the less still it seemed. Each time I glanced away at the racks, at the scanner, at my logbook, then back, the can had inched a fraction, just enough to be undeniable. At 0407, I lifted it.
Heavy, far heavier than a single reel should weigh. Inside, the film shifted again, a long, slow shh, like someone dragging cloth across a floor. It wasn't random. It was steady, measured, almost like breathing. The scanner blinked, screen washed red. Oldest, do not ignore. I set the can on a nearby pallet, but the cold stayed in my gloves. My fingers ached with it. At 04:19, the air in the aisle changed again. The draft at my ankles surged, colder, cutting through my boots like ice water. The overhead lights dimmed once, then steadied. The VOC monitor climbed to 0.44 ppm. I tasted vinegar and metal at the back of my throat. When I aimed my headlamp higher, I saw dust trails on the third rack level. Several cans had shifted outward, all in a row, like a spine curving toward me. Their rims caught the light like teeth. The yellow phone rang at 04:28. My stomach dropped. I picked it up anyway. The hum pulsed 7 times. Then, faint and ragged, static formed words. Do not ignore. The line went dead. At 04:42, I walked the aisle backward, lamp fixed on the floor. Salt dust rose in tiny eddies around my boots. Behind me, the fallen can slid half an inch on its own, grating against steel with a deliberate scrape. By 04:59, the salt pillars on either side of the aisle creaked, not collapsing, just flexing, whispering under pressure. Thin sheets flaked off and fell, shattering like glass. The sound echoed too long, as though the mine itself wanted to join in. The clock turned. I wrote 0500. Can moved. Film inside breathes. Scanner warning. Do not ignore. Phone hum. 7 pulses. Voice said, follow it. Multiple reels shifted outward. VOC 0.44. Salt pillars shedding. Then slower, I added, the film wants to be followed.
At 5:03, the scanner vibrated so hard I nearly dropped it. The screen pulsed a single command in blood-red text. Follow. No shelf numbers, no barcodes, just that. I looked down the aisle. Several cans now jutted forward along the third rack, forming a crooked line deeper into D19. They pointed like breadcrumbs, each one nudged closer to the edge than the last. At 5:12, the cold draft shifted from ankle level to knee height, sliding up like a tide. My pants chilled as though dunked in icy water. I inhaled, and the smell of vinegar sharpened until my eyes watered. The VOC monitor blinked, 0.46 ppm. I followed the line of reels, boots crunching through salt dust that grew thicker with every step. My lamp caught something new, faint drag marks across the dust, parallel grooves like something heavy had been pulled along the aisle. They led toward the back wall. At 5:28, one of the cans tipped free. I ducked aside as it struck the floor with a hollow boom. The lid popped half open, and a coil of 35mm film slithered out like a tongue, curling across the tiles. The strip was slick with moisture, though the mine air should have desiccated it to powder. The strip quivered, then uncoiled farther, inching across the dust toward the wall. Not random, directed. My radio hissed, then cleared, carrying a voice like tape warping through a broken speaker. But Rowan, older, oldest. I froze, then forced the handset to my mouth. Say it again? Only static. At 5:42, the yellow phone rang. The hum pulsed 8 times before fading. No words this time, just silence that felt heavy. I bent to examine the strip of film. Images ghosted faintly in the frames, faces blurred, mouths open, eyes wide, caught mid-scream. Not actors, not prints I'd ever seen logged. The draft surged colder, the grooves in the dust deepening as though something had just dragged itself one aisle farther. At 5:59, I logged. Reels forming path. Film unspooled on its own, leading deeper. Frames show unknown screaming faces. Drag marks in dust. Phone hum sequence 8. VOC 0.46. Draft rising. I underlined once. The archive is leading me.
The reels stopped short of the aisle's back wall, as though they were pointing at it. Not a door, not a hatch, just salt bricks mortared by time. Yet my lamp beam revealed hairline cracks, thin as veins, running across the surface. At 06:07, the fallen can at my feet shivered again. Another strip of film slithered free, coiling toward the cracks. The draft, once ankle-high, now pulled at my waist, tugging fabric against my skin like invisible fingers. The VOC monitor chimed 0.48 ppm. I coughed once, throat raw with vinegar and copper. I pressed my ear against the wall. Behind the salt, I swore I heard it. Film reels turning on spindles, the click-click of a projector gate catching frames. Slow, steady, grinding through eternity. At 06:21, the yellow phone rang. My pulse spiked before the second bell. I lifted it with hands shaking. The hum pulsed 9 times, slow, deliberate. Then static broke into a phrase. Open the wall. I dropped the handset back in its cradle. It rattled like a warning bell. By 06:34, the cracks in the wall shimmered, salt dust falling like snow. A faint dampness spread along the seams, darker than the pale stone. Impossible. This place could not make water. But I smelled it, briny, old, like the bottom of a drowned cellar. The scanner vibrated, screen flashing, oldest behind. At 06:48, I pulled my glove across one crack. The salt flaked away, easier than stone should. Beneath it, metal gleamed, rusted, corroded, but shaped. An edge, a frame. The draft surged once more, strong enough to sway my stance. The film strips on the floor lifted, writhing upward, pointing their frames at the seam like compasses gone feral. At 06:98, the overhead lights flickered, then held. My logbook waited, trembling under my grip as I wrote. Wall cracked, noise of projector behind. Phone hum sequence 9, scanner oldest behind. Metal structure beneath the salt, VOC 0.48. Draft waist high, film strips point at wall, and I scrawled one more line without meaning to. The archive wants the wall open.
At 7:03, the cracks widened with a sound like teeth grinding. Chips of salt fell in sharp little showers, pattering across the cans and floor tiles. My beam caught the outline, clearer now. A rectangular frame, steel eaten by rust, buried just beneath the mined wall. The scanner shook itself alive, flashing access oldest. I pressed my palm against the corroded seam. The metal was colder than ice, biting through the glove. It throbbed faintly, like a heart behind stone. At 7:15, the yellow phone rang again. This time I lifted it without hesitation. The hum pulsed 10 times, slow and rhythmic. Then, through static stretched thin, I heard a whisper. "Door. Open it." The voice cracked apart into static, but I swear it said my name again before cutting off. By 7:28, condensation streaked the wall around the frame. Water ran in rivulets, carving dark trails down the salt surface. The air smelled wrong now. Vinegar, copper, and mold, like a film can opened after decades too long. I pulled my multi-tool, chisel edge against the seam. Each strike flaked salt in big slabs. The sound of each chip hitting the floor echoed too far, like the mine had more room behind it than it should. At 7:46, the draft surged into a wind, whipping strips of loose film around my boots. They rose and fell like snakes trying to climb the wall. The overhead lights dimmed to half their strength, buzzing hard, fighting against whatever was waking. The seam groaned. Metal screeched as though flexing after years asleep. A slit opened, half an inch wide, then an inch. From it spilled a breath of air so cold and damp it burned my lungs. The VOC monitor shrieked red, 0.50 ppm. At 7:58, my log read, cracks expanded, metal frame revealed, phone hum sequence 10, wall leaks condensation, began opening with tool, cold draft burst through, VOC 0.50, red alarm, and beneath, in jagged script I barely recognized as mine, there is a door in the archive, and it is not locked.
At 8:04, the slit widened. Rusted hinges screamed from inside the wall, a sound that set my teeth vibrating. The salt crumbled away in fist-sized chunks until a thin, jagged doorway yawned open. Beyond it, blackness. A blackness thicker than any mine corridor I'd seen. Light seemed to bend inward, swallowed before it could land. The scanner blinked once, twice, then froze with a new phrase. Enter oldest. My boots hesitated at the threshold. The cold pouring out wrapped me waist to crown, a damp breath that stank of vinegar, mildew, and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. My eyes watered instantly. At 8:17, I swung my beam through the slit. It caught the outline of a narrow corridor, carved rough, walls streaked with brine. At the far end stood racks, film racks just like the archives, but twisted, bent sideways, sagging under weight. Reels hung like broken ornaments, strips dangling loose and quivering though no air moved. The yellow phone on the main wall rang again. I almost laughed at the absurdity. I picked it up. The hum pulsed 11 times. After the 11th, a voice rasped, "Inside, behind the shelf." I dropped the handset. It swung once, creaking like a metronome. By 8:32, the draft pouring from the slit grew violent. Loose cans toppled from the racks behind me, clattering and rolling toward the door as if dragged by gravity that only applied there.
The film strips on the floor slithered forward, sliding into the dark, pulled by something I couldn't see. At 8:47, the fluorescence overhead surged, then cut out entirely. My lamp was the only light left, thin against the black breath spilling from the hidden hall. My lungs burned with cold. The VOC monitor wailed, 0.53 ppm. The number meant nothing anymore. It was the insistence of the climb that mattered. At 8:59, my notebook read, door opened, corridor visible with twisted racks, phone hum sequence 11, voice said, inside, behind the shelf. Loose cans rolled toward the slit, fluorescence failed, VOC 0.53. I pressed harder than I meant to and scrolled, the archive has a second archive, and it wants me inside.
At 9:05, I stepped through the slit. The cold wrapped me whole, crawling under my jacket, under my skin. My lamp beam fought to stay alive, dimming at the edges as if the dark was thicker here. The floor sloped slightly down, uneven, crusted with salt and brine. My boots scraped against damp stone. Each step echoed wrong, short, clipped, as though the walls pressed too close to let the sound breathe. At 9:17, I reached the first of the racks. They leaned like trees in a drowned forest, twisted metal sagging under reels warped into unfamiliar shapes. Some reels had fused together, melted by time or heat, frozen in a tangle of rust and acetate. Others hung by a single spindle, swaying without air to move them. I scanned one, curiosity stronger than sense. The handheld flickered, screen bleeding static, then froze with a phrase, oldest present. I set it down, afraid of what the next message might say. At 9:29, the draft that had pulled me inward shifted. Now it pressed from behind, as if the door itself were exhaling, forcing me deeper. The racks whispered as film strips uncoiled, brushing the floor like fingers. Some strips glistened wet, though no water should exist this deep. The yellow phone at my belt, silent since I left the main aisle, buzzed without ringing. The earpiece hummed 12 times. After the 12th, static shaped into a new phrase. Oldest waits. I didn't answer. I couldn't. By 9:46, my log shook in my hands as I wrote. Entered second archive, racks twisted, reels fused. Scanner read, oldest present. Phone sequence 12, voice said, oldest waits. Found untouched rack, labeled with my name. And then, beneath it, before I realized what I was doing, I think the archive has been waiting for me.
At 10:04, I reached for one of the silver reels on the pristine rack. The air around it was colder than the rest of the tunnel, enough to sting my knuckles through the glove. The label stared up at me. Rowan, 1988. My birth year. I lifted it free. No dust, no rust, no signs of decay. The lid slid off too easily, as though it had been opened many times before. Inside lay film wound tight, glossy, alive. My lamp caught faint images on the first few frames, blurry hospital lights, a woman's hand gripping a sheet, a newborn's face smeared with blood. I dropped the reel. It clattered once, then settled. At 10:19, I pulled another from the rack. Rowan, 1996. Inside, grainy frames of a boy's birthday party. My birthday party. A cake with 6 candles, a crooked grin I recognized instantly. The footage was real, but impossible. No camera had been there that night. The scanner vibrated, screaming on its screen. Oldest record. At 10:33, the floor draft swirled around my legs, now carrying the smell of burnt plastic. The fused reels on the leaning racks rattled, shaking as though something inside them was struggling to get free. Strips of film uncoiled and dragged themselves across the salt floor, slithering toward the pristine rack. The yellow phone buzzed again. The hum pulsed 13 times. This time the static did not whisper, it growled. Deep, low. Don't play it. By 10:48, the pristine rack began to groan. The reels shifted in unison, scraping against their slots. One fell forward, lid popping loose before it hit the ground. The strip inside unspooled with violent force, whipping across the floor like a live wire. Frames flashed in my lamp beam. Older me, hunched over a desk, writing in a notebook, the same notebook in my hand. By 10:59, my entry read, "Pristine rack labeled with my name. Reels show impossible personal footage. Scanner, oldest record. Phone hum sequence 13. Reels shaking, unspooling violently. VOC off scale." Then I scrawled, words cramped and uneven. The archive is not keeping records. It is making them.
At 11:05, the pristine reel that had whipped open lay stretched across the aisle like a road, the frames reflected in my lamp, flickering as if each still image carried its own weak light. The longer I looked, the less still they became. Faces twitched, eyes rolled, mouths opened and closed silently, like they were mouthing words I couldn't hear. The scanner pulsed red, screen filled with one command: play oldest. My gloves shook as I lifted the strip. It was damp, sticky, almost warm. I threaded it through my handheld inspection viewer, a tool meant for checking condition, not projection. The viewer hummed to life. The first frames were mine, my hands, this very moment holding the film. But as the film slid through, the frames ran ahead of the present. I saw myself crouched, writing a log entry I hadn't written yet. Then farther, me stumbling through the aisle, my lamp flickering out, my face pale and wet with fear. At 11:24, the draft howled through the racks, strong enough to sway them. Loose metal screamed, tearing at its welds. Salt dust burst from the ceiling, snowing down in choking clouds. The yellow phone rang. I grabbed it like a lifeline. The hum pulsed 14 times. Then, through static sharp as knives, the voice returned. "You're already on it." At 11:37, my viewer jammed. The strip inside buckled, melting at the sprocket holes. The film gave off a sickly sweet smoke, but the frames burned themselves into my vision, me standing at the hidden door, but not alone. A second figure, at my side, blurred, faceless, but its hand gripping my arm. By 11:52, the floor rattled. The salt pillars groaned with deep cracks. Racks leaned farther, reels rolling like marbles toward the pristine rack, pulled as if by gravity. At 11:59, I scrolled in my log. Film played itself, showed me minutes ahead. Viewer burned out. Phone hum 14 pulses. Heard voice, "You're already on it."
figure appeared beside me in film. Salt structure, unstable. And at the bottom of the page, in letters I don't remember forming, I am the record being played.
At 12:06, I felt it, pressure at my elbow. My lamp caught nothing, but the weight of a hand was there. When I stepped, the grip tugged me half a pace forward. The pristine rack shuddered, reels clattering like teeth. More film strips unspooled, slithering across the floor. They wrapped around my boots, pulling toward the back wall. At 12:23, the scanner blinked, not alone. The yellow phone shrieked, 15 pulses this time. The voice broke through, faint, breathless. Recording continues. Salt dust rained harder from the ceiling. Every inhale scraped raw in my lungs. The VOC monitor flatlined red. By 12:58, my log read, "Something unseen gripping me. Scanner not alone. Phone hum 15. Racks shuddering. Air unbreathable." And I added, "The figure beside me is patient." At 1:11, the floor shook. One of the leaning racks finally gave. It slammed down like a steel tree, cans bursting open, film spewing in wet coils. The air filled with the stench of vinegar and mold, thick enough to choke. I staggered, the unseen hand still gripping my arm, steadying me instead of letting me fall. The scanner screamed red, "Follow deepest." At 1:29, the yellow phone rang, 16 pulses this time. The voice was closer, clearer. "Down, deeper still." The draft pulled harder, no longer just air. It was suction, dragging dust, film, and breath toward the hidden dark beyond the pristine rack. By 1:59, my log trembled with each line. Rack collapsed, films burst, scanner, follow deepest, phone hum, 16, voice clearer, draft is suction, and beneath it, the archive wants me below.
At 2:04, the debris cleared just enough for me to see it. A stairwell cut into the salt floor, revealed by the fallen rack. The steps were slick, glistening with brine, descending into a dark that swallowed my beam. The unseen grip tugged again, urging me down. My legs shook, but I moved anyway. At 2:21, the scanner flashed, oldest beneath. The phone shrieked, 17 pulses. After the last, the voice rasped, "You've always been going down." Salt dripped from the ceiling in steady drops, each one echoing like a clock. By 2:56, my entry read, "Hidden stairwell uncovered. Scanner, oldest beneath. Phone hum 17. Message clear. Draft pours upward." And I scrolled, "The archive has a basement."
At 3:07, I reached the bottom of the stairs. A vast chamber opened, larger than any mined hall should be. Salt walls glistened like wet glass, lined with racks that curved upward, disappearing into dark. Every reel glowed faintly, as if lit from within. The unseen hand released me. I stood alone. At 3:19, the scanner burned out, screen white, then black. Its last word lingered in my eyes. Final. The phone in my belt buzzed one last time. 18 pulses. No voice, just the hum, stretching longer, heavier, until it felt like it lived in my chest. By 3:52, I could hear it, film reels turning all around me, synchronized, endless. The sound wasn't mechanical anymore. It was breathing. My log read, reached chamber, racks alive with glowing reels. Scanner died, last word final. Phone hum 18, no message. Sound of reels equals breathing. And then, unbidden, the archive is awake. At 4:03, the glow from the reels brightened until the whole chamber pulsed like a heart. Each rack throbbed in rhythm, the film strips shimmering as if they carried veins of light. My lamp was useless now. The reels lit the space themselves. I stepped forward. A single reel slid free from the nearest rack, landing at my feet without a sound. Its label read only one word: Rowan, end. At 4:18, I lifted it. The metal burned cold. Inside, frames fluttered alive, already moving without a projector. I saw myself walking here, picking this reel up, staring into its frames. Each second of my present appeared in advance, half a beat ahead, like the archive was writing me as I lived. The yellow phone, clipped to my belt, vibrated once, 19 pulses. Then it shattered into static, the voice rising for the last time. You were always the oldest. By 4:41, the archive swelled with noise, not just breathing, but voices, hundreds, thousands, overlapping, all caught mid-sentence, mid-scream, mid-laugh. Every reel spinning, every voice a record of a life. And threaded through it all, my own voice reading my own log. At 5:08, I wrote my final line, the page blurring under salt dust and cold sweat. The archive isn't keeping the past, it's building the oldest record out of us, out of me. The reel in my hands unspooled in a rush, strips snapping forward like chains. They wrapped my arms, chest, throat, pulling me toward the racks. The last thing I saw was my own face, caught in the final frame, eyes wide, mouth open, trapped forever. 5:00, record complete.